Hello, I'm Dr. Jock Carnachan, here to be interviewed by Mark Galloway. I'm from the year of 59 and this interview is for the Headmaster's Heritage Committee.
Thank you, Dr. Jock Carnachan, class of 1959, for joining us today with the Headmaster's Heritage Committee to talk about your insight, not only with your time at Auckland Grammar, but also, looking at your career and your legendary legacy that you're leaving.
Thanks, Mark. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm enjoying the opportunity to talk to somebody of this generation at Grammar. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Carnachan. So let's go right to 1959, when you were a third form. What were some of your first, most vivid memories at Auckland Grammar when you started?
Well, I'd have to say the first assembly made a great impression, coming into the school hall, the grand old hall, and seeing the backdrop of the honours board and 1,250 boys, which was the roll then, sitting and chatting away, and then of course the bell went and out came Mr. Cooper, the headmaster then, and there was immediate silence. You could have heard a pin drop, and he walked up onto the stage behind the lectern and just gazed across all the boys, and you immediately felt a sense of tradition, and it was quite an interesting experience for the first day, and that image has stayed with me. There are lots of things that I remember about that era, but just a few. Obviously, meeting new friends and new classes and getting used to the academic environment, some wonderful teachers. Amazingly, I had 5 teachers in my first 2 years that had taught my father. So
Wow.
the tradition and history of that, of course, meant an awful lot. We had a cadet battalion. That was an interesting experience because I spent time later on in the military, but we got our basic drill training, how to handle a rifle. There were 7 companies. A lot of the masters were in the Territorial Army in those days, and they acted as officers with the senior boys as NCOs. Wow. And we did drill exercises usually on a Monday afternoon on the top ground, so that was something to remember. Then, of course, trialling for sports teams, cricket, athletics, and so on. Those are all great memories.
Wow. And can you describe the ambience of the school back then when you first came in 1959?
Yes, the ambience, the atmosphere was impressive. Headmaster was an impressive man. The staff were impressive. Just the feeling of tradition, the architecture of the school, the history of the school, which I've been told about by family, of course, over having had my grandfather and father at the school and cousins while I was there. So it was a very positive atmosphere. Enjoyed sport and just a good all-round education. There was a lot of fun. We had some very humorous masters, particularly Jock Bracewell, who was deputy headmaster.
Yeah.
a wonderful fellow. And so there was a good mixture of serious work and fun, good friends.
And Dr. Carnachan, what would be your experience with school life and that following on to your tertiary education from Auckland Grammar?
Well, you very quickly learned at grammar that about competition, and if you wanted to achieve reasonably well, you had to work hard, and particularly in my case. And so you learned early on about some academic endeavour and rigour, and the need to sacrifice a bit of time to work. Also learned a bit of self-responsibility, and the other thing was, on the sports field, you enjoyed the company of your teammates and so on. So there was the balance of sport and learning a bit about teamwork. And of course, all that translates into getting to university and having a bit of self-discipline and knowing how to study and work and sit exams, which I thought grammar, in my case, prepared me for pretty well.
Yeah. And along with, the competitive side of it and, the academic, side of Auckland Grammar, what would be some of your happiest or some of your favourite memories of Auckland Grammar? Interactions, between, your headmaster, staff, peers, and any stories that you still carry on to this day?
Well, I think I can say my whole time at grammar was happy. I enjoyed it all. But particularly my last year, as one of the senior boys and a prefect, fortunately not having to sit scholarship that year, we had time for a more social life. So by that I mean we were asked to other school balls to represent the school at old boys functions. We showed visitors and visiting dignitaries around the school, and one particularly enjoyable time was when the All Blacks came. The 63 team had 4 old boys. Captain Wilson Winneray, famous old boy. Kel Tremaine, one of the flankers. There was Keith Nelson, a lock. And on the wing we had Malcolm Dick, so 4 All Blacks. And when Mr. Cooper introduced them to the school, there was huge applause, and he made the point that not only were they great rugby players, but they all had academic degrees. So he pushed the good all-rounder message there.
Yeah.
We had a really enjoyable association with the headmaster that year, Mr. Cooper, and we saw the softer side of him. He was a wonderful man. He was amazing. Occasionally, if you walked around the grounds, which he liked to do, he could call out a lad and know their name and a bit about them, which impressed everybody, really. He was very good in that way. We had some characters of teachers. One particular teacher, I remember, Jim Cusack, coached me in rugby in the early grades and then in the rowing team. And he got the best out of the boys with a few dry quips. Didn't ever have to say much, but I remember one particular incident. We were rowing down in the Aoraki Basin, which is where we used to train, and he said, "Carnachan, lad, you might as well be paddling with a teaspoon." And of course that got me cracking, but he was like that, and he was a great rugby coach as well in the junior grades. Probably a standout incident that year was the King's Grammar match. When Grammar unfortunately went down, it was at King's. I think we lost 6-3, something like that from memory, but the Grammar boys were pretty wound up about it. And so one of the more athletic members of our group managed to get up the flagpole and pinch the King's flag. And all mayhem broke out. There was a bit of a stoush between the boys of the two schools, and an emergency meeting on Monday morning. The headmasters, anyway, the flag was returned, peace was made, and Mr. Cooper and Mr. Greenbank sorted it out. So that was a memory. But yes, I could go on, but I think you get the idea.
That's fantastic. And well, you mentioned before, some of the old boys that came to grammar when you were still at school, such as Wilson Winneray, as captain of the All Blacks. What you would obviously be surrounded by, a lot of quintessential grammar men. And my question for you is, being surrounded by this kind of environment, how has grammar changed you as a man?
Well, I certainly left grammar feeling a very proud grammar old boy, or as my son says, a proud grammar man. And the reason for that was that I had a most enjoyable experience through the school. I was lucky in that way. I learnt, things like self-responsibility, a bit of mental and physical resilience going through the academic classes and then on the sports field. And in that I learnt the value of teamwork and looking after your mates, which was a big part of our group going through. And with that came some lessons that taught humility and also the wish to serve your fellow men and be of some use to the community.
Yeah, and are there any values in particular that you admire from Auckland Grammar that you still live by?
Yes, definitely. I think the grammar values that I still hold to this day are really, as I've already said, teamwork, self-discipline and loyalty to your friends, and some resilience in what you do, and being of some service to the community. Those things are all things that were important at grammar and still are to this day.
Now, moving on to your career, you're obviously quite a prominent member in the Medical Society in New Zealand. And what was it that made you want to get into medicine in the first place?
Well, it's a very simple story, really. I was born and bred in the Coromandel town of Waihi. The local GP was a great family friend and quite an inspirational person. And so at a very early age, I thought that's what I want to do. And so very luckily, I was able to pursue that and eventually get through medical school and become a GP.
And Dr. Carnachan, you've been recognised for your unconditional care for your patients and humility. But what was it that makes you keep doing what you're doing with such devotion to your patients and to your community?
Well, it's a huge privilege being a doctor, a GP, and as part of the community. Particularly, you go through the highs and the lows of the community, of the people that you are looking after. And going through my training, there were a couple of things that I remembered and which I'll try to work to. One is always treat people as you'd like to be treated yourself, and always listen to what people are telling you. As one of my old physician teachers in Dunedin said at medical school, listen, 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 because if you listen well enough, the patient will often give you the diagnosis. And I think that's an important part of what I do. But I enjoy it every day, and it's a great privilege.
Now, this next question is quite a big question. I find it even hard for myself, to decide who are the three people in history you admire most and why?
Well, it's very easy for me. There are three people that I would mention. My first pick would be Hippocrates, remarkable person. We still talk about him. He was at his peak in 400 BC or thereabouts. He wrote 70 books and articles on medical conditions and the treatment thereof. But most importantly, he produced the Hippocratic Oath, the pledge that physicians have traditionally taken when they qualify. And the four parts of that are still highly relevant, in my opinion, today. And they are that, firstly, you must do no harm. Secondly, always work and give the best of you, the best treatments that you can. Treat to the best of your knowledge and ability. And finally, strive to live an exemplary personal and professional life. And as I say, I think those things are highly relevant today. In fact, probably more so.
Yeah. And
second person that I think's worth mentioning is Louis Pasteur. He was the French bacteriologist who in 1862 developed pasteurisation, which of course is a public health measure, saved innumerable lives at that time. Obviously still does, but he also was a pioneer in vaccination, so that alongside Koch, who was also working around that time, their contribution to the public health is enormous, and virtually wiped out things like rabies and anthrax and cholera and typhoid, which were huge killers and affected the economies of the Western world and the rest of the world. So certainly I think he's a worthy one. And then my final pick would be Winston Churchill, who was a marvellous leader, and particularly because of his courage and conviction and dogged determination, and of course helped democracy triumph over fascism, and made a terrific contribution to history.
Wow, that is incredible. And Dr. Carnachan, as an old boy, seeing it grow over time, what would you like Auckland Grammar to be, or where do you see Auckland Grammar being in, say, the next 10 to 20 years?
I would like to see Auckland Grammar remain as one of the preeminent secondary schools in the country. I think the reason for grammar success, personally, is that it's a school that's known to stick to sensible traditions, tried and true traditions in education and in the development of young men. And I think there are 2 or 3 good reasons for that. One is we've been very fortunate at Auckland Grammar to have some marvellous headmasters over the 150 plus years. I think there've only been 11 headmasters, so they've been durable, wonderful leaders who've been supported by a very capable group in the Board of Governors. I think that's the other thing. We've had wonderful people serve on our boards with knowledge and expertise and wisdom. And I think backing all of that is the strength of the old boys. We've got a wonderfully supportive old boys network, and that backs the board and the headmaster. So looking ahead, I can't see any reason why Auckland Grammar shouldn't remain as a leading secondary school for the next 20 years.
That's marvellous. And Dr. Carnachan, what does it feel like to be an Augusta Award winner for 2021?
Well, I feel very humble, and in fact, when I was told by Paul, I was shocked. It was a wonderful surprise, and I couldn't think of anything that could be greater for me than to receive an award like this from the school and the community that are very important to me. So I feel humble and blessed and very fortunate. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jock Carnachan, class of 1959, for joining me today, talking about not only your insight on your school years, but also your incredible career, your contributions to not only, the community, but also the wider society in New Zealand. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.